What else you see? My wife. She's super pissed at me. Well, you're lucky. It's Christmas time. You get her a little gift. No, I wish I could just buy my way out of this one, but it's not going to happen because the only thing Sophia wants right now are these ridiculous Chinese figurines. So I need to go down to Chinatown to buy them. I do not like that place. It smells like hot garbage. You know what? I'll take you. I know my way around there, and I pick up some free penis wine anyway. So we go down there and we'll get. What was the product that you wanted to even worry about? I don't know what to do here. Kurt Warner, Peyton Manning, which one do I start?
I think Manning got us here. I think we got to stick with it.
I'm gonna go with Manning. I'm making an executive
Honestly,
decision.
I think you're freaking out right now. You're making an executive decision.
Yep. And it is over. My decision's been made.
I think you're really doing this because this is the playoffs. You're just overthinking.
I'm not overthinking. There's no thinking going on. Nothing. Here. I'm thinking with my gut. Like a man.
Wearing those man pants.
Yes. Man pants.
Maybe just a little too snug.
Nope.
Really?
31 32s. 34 32s.
Go.
I don't want to.
You're being a child.
I'm not being a child.
Why are you not listening to me?
I want to listen to myself.
Enjoy losing. You could have won 1 year.
Oh, hey, a couple people jumped in real quick. I just finished posting the invite to everyone, so give them a couple minutes. If you have questions, start putting them into the chat. I'll start with those questions. Actually, let me pause. Actually, let me. If you have any questions, throw them into the chat. I'll start with those. I'm sure I'll be talking a little bit about the self-concept, but if my early stream today was any judge, it doesn't sound like we had a lot of questions still about that assignment, but that's my thought going into today was that we'd be talking about that a lot. But if you have questions about the final paper and poster, we could talk about that. That seemed to be the common thing earlier today. So put the questions that you have into the chat, and in like 3 minutes, I will get started. I know I'm going to talk about the self-concept for a couple minutes, and that might only be like 3 to 5 minutes. And then we'll see what your questions are. And for you football fans, happy draft day. They can't stop checking out any new news that might be coming for the draft. Really? That is very surprising. Okay. So nobody posted any questions in chat so far, so I'm just going to start by talking about the self concept for a few minutes. We'll see if some questions come in. We'll see if some people jump in a few minutes late. We had a pretty big turnout considering what they usually do in the early stream. I think we had like 8 people in the chat for a little bit. So it might be that this is a quiet one and the first one was a little bit busier. Yes, Keith, correct. 2 studies. So you have the library session. You hopefully found up to 3 articles during. You're only going to need to use 2 out of those 3. And if you weren't able to get to those 3, I know a lot of people only got 1 article from the library session this semester. So if you only got 1, you just have to find a second one from Psych Info. But your paper will be on 2 articles. So starting off with the self-concept, and then I could talk about the paper and poster a little bit more if need be. So paper for this week, 3 parts to what you're doing for this week. And I'm talking about the self-concept paper, not the movie research poster. If you decided to do that and you have questions about that, let me know. But that, I feel like, has been pretty straightforward. I haven't gotten questions about that one. For the self-concept paper this week, 3 parts of the assignment. Part 1, what you need to do is write that list of 20 things. And I think everyone's had success with that. I haven't gotten questions about the list itself. Step 2, after you have that list of 20 plus things, you're now going to go one by one and evaluate those things in terms of, is this part of my real self? Is this part of my self-concept? If you're not sure what those terms are, we can talk more about them for sure, but there's tons of information in the module about those things. And I've talked extensively about those between the live streams, the 10-minute lecture, et cetera, et cetera. When you are doing step 1, you should be trying to not evaluate, not think after something pops into your head. If you're answering the question, I am ... and an answer pops into your head, you should immediately write that down. Then step 2 is when you actually evaluate and think about those things. So now you're going to think about, is this part of my real self or is this part of my self-concept? The only alarming thing there would be if you see everything in your real self or everything in your self-concept. That'd be a little bit of an issue. But it could be 15 and 5 self-concept or 15 in the self-concept. It could be, however it might happen for you. There's no rule on. But if it's all one or the other, then you probably either had some issues with self-evaluation or you didn't really think enough for the list you came up with. Once you have that list, you evaluate them one by one, self-concept, placing them in, then you write the paper. Now, as far as the paper is concerned, I can't stress this part enough. It's an informal paper. I keep saying that over and over again for a reason. You can use I. It's reflection-based. I expect to see I in the paper. You don't have to treat it like it's a formal essay. A lot of the submissions I get will look closer to a blog entry or a journal or diary entry than a formal paper, and that's fine. So don't think this has to be a formal essay. It does have to be 2 full pages, so 2 to 3 pages means 2 full pages, not 2 lines onto the second page. And all you're doing, what I'm specifically looking for is pretty simple. I need to see that you, A, understood the self and the self-concept, and B, that you can apply the self and self-concept to the list that you created. Now, you might, after you write that list, and if you write a good list and you're not really evaluating it while you're jotting things down on paper, at the end, when you do evaluate it, you might realize there's something you don't want to write about in the paper. You don't want other people to read about it. You don't want me to read about that, and that's fine. You don't have to talk about all 20 things in your paper. I'm not going to be counting them. It just has to be 2 full pages. It has to apply the self and self-concept. But if there's a couple things on your list that you don't want to write about, that's fine. I actually think that'll probably happen for at least half of you, that there'll be something you would prefer to not include in the paper. And then that's what you submit. As long as I can see, as long as you have 2 full pages, the page length is important for this assignment, especially because if you're doing less, you're just not putting in the effort. It's pretty much as simple as that. Each item on your list, and you're applying it to the self and self-concept, it's going to be 2 sentences for each item. That's easily going to add up to 2 to 3 pages if you have a list of 20 things. So if you only have a couple lines on the second page, then you just didn't do enough. But as long as you give me the right page length and I can see that you understood the self and self concept and that you're applying it, I'm happy. That's what I'm looking for this week. Doesn't matter how many you put into the paper, however many fit. If you put all 20 of them, that's great. Yes, double spaced and size 12 fonts, Times New Roman, all perfect. Yep. And if you write a list of 20 things, and you can write more than 20 things on your list, every single list that's been emailed to me has had at least a few more than 20 things. So there's going to be plenty of you that only have 20, but don't feel pressured that you have your 20th thing and you have to stop there. The most of the lists that I've seen have been somewhere in the neighborhood of like 22 to 25 things. A couple of them actually have been even higher than that. So don't feel pressured to stop. If ideas are still coming to you, keep writing them down and then stop as soon as you get to a pause and you can't think of anything. If you have, when you're looking at the list, let's say you have exactly 20 and you look at that list and there's 3 things on that list that you don't really want to include in the paper, and that could definitely happen. There's part of who we really are that we just may not want to talk about to other people. They're kind of things that we keep swept under the rug for ourselves, and that could be great. That's something that you could still look at for you, but you don't have to include it for me. And then you include 17 things in your paper. That's fine. If you write about each item in a good amount of detail, and you realize that you're a couple lines onto the 3rd page and you've only talked about 10 things on your list, that's fine too. Just include 10, 12 things. However many you need to, however many you want to, is the only big rule I would have there is if you aren't getting to 2 pages, you need to include more. 2 full pages. I can't stress that enough. I don't want to see papers that are like 4 lines onto the 2nd page or halfway down the 2nd page. It should be 2 full pages for this. But it's a self-help reflection exercise, so it's very informal. No, you did not have to send me your list. Let's see. I'm sorry if I confused you with that. A lot of people sent me their list just because they were confused and wanted to know if they were on the right track. So I got maybe like 8 lists or something like that emailed to me over the course of the week. I did not in any way mean that you had to email me your list. And to that, you don't even have to include in your paper. You don't have to have each item of your list. I just need to see that you're talking about the items that you decide to talk about. But your list itself, I actually want you to keep it private because there's probably for at least half of you going to be something on that list that you wouldn't want me to read about. And for the people who don't end up with things like that on their list, it might be, I'm not saying it is, it might even be because you were so worried when you were writing the list about it going into a paper that you didn't think about some of those things that I ideally want you to think about. So when you write your list up, if you have a couple things on that list that are personal to you, you don't have to include them in any way anywhere on that paper. What I'm trying to say, like if I did this assignment myself and I write a list of 20 things, I can guarantee there's going to be more than one. There's going to be probably 3 or 4 things on that list that are going to be some things that I am this specific thing, but I'm not proud that I'm those things. We all do have negative traits to us. I might not want to write about those. I might not want to tell other people about those. Those might be the things that I'm working on myself for myself. And those things are totally fine. They're normal. So not wanting to include them in the paper for anyone else to read makes perfect sense. And unless you have questions, that's all I really need to talk about for the paper assignment. It seems from the last live stream from earlier today that people were pretty much on the right track. I know I have a good amount that have been submitted already. So if you have questions, we'll talk the whole hour if we need to about it. Only other things that I need to mention to you guys. We have this week's assignment is the personality. After this week is done, we have 3 things left for the semester. Our 3rd exam is next week. We're also covering psychological disorders next week. I tried to organize the module for next week so that it's pretty well understand it just from clicking through all the links. So what I mean by that is I posted a lot of video links for the different disorders. And if you're watching each one of those, I think you'll understand those disorders. And then if you watch my video lecture, the 10-minute lecture, and this one, it's under 10 minutes for next week. I'm going to focus more on not the specific disorders that the videos cover. I'm going to focus more on what mental health really is and what that means. There's a lot of important things before you get to the disorders, and that's what I'm focusing on in that 10-minute lecture. We have the exam next week. It's on memory, personality, and abnormal, and psychological disorders, abnormal psychological disorders. So it's on the 3 chapters. And then on May 4th, you have both your paper and your poster due on the same date, and that May 4th is a Monday. So you do not get a lot of time in that module to work on it. So you have to be working on it a little bit ahead of time. If you are starting them both on Monday, well, then Monday is going to be a horrible day for you if you wait until May 4th to start them. I have information for that assignment in every module for the rest of the semester. So next week, you will see just a YouTube video of me talking about what goes in the paper, what goes in the poster. You're going to have the assignment for the poster, for the assignment for the paper. You have a template type of guide for the paper. And then I also was asked in the earlier live stream to include the links to the library research session. So for those of you who do need to find a second article, that's in there too. But please don't wait to find that second article. If you haven't found that yet, then you're definitely behind the 8 ball already. That's our assignments for the rest of the week. I'm going to next week have the live streams for you guys on Monday and Thursday. We'll be talking a little bit about the exam, a little bit about the paper, a little bit about the poster, a little bit about psychological disorders. And there's a couple takeaways that I have for the class that I'll either talk about in the live streams or post a separate video for you all about. And that's the rest of the semester. We do not have a lot of time left. The last assignments that you submit are due on Monday, May 4th for the big assignments, but there is some little things you have to do for the poster on Tuesday, May 5th and Wednesday, May 6th. They're pretty much little things. What you do on Tuesday is just posting the 2 replies on the discussion board, just like you've been, so it probably takes a half an hour for most of you. And on Wednesday, it'll take all of 10 minutes. It's very short. And that's scheduling wise for the rest of the semester from here. There's only a couple people in the room right now, so if you have any questions, make sure you put them down in the chat. But I went over the essentials that I have, and we'll see what kind of questions that we really have from here. But that's really all I know I wanted to talk about today. So I'm really, for the rest of the time, I'm just going to be answering questions. Thank you for saying that. I really, really appreciate that. I thought as hard as I could. I spent more time probably thinking about how to organize things for you than I did on anything else. I didn't want to organize things the same way that I do for an online class when I teach a full online class from the beginning of the semester, because I thought it would be a little too hard to find things and a little too technology heavy. So I wanted to simplify things, and I really tried to. So I hope everyone feels that way, but I really appreciate that compliment, because that was very much something I tried to focus on. So I hope everyone agrees that the way that I have it organized for you, it's easy to find what you're looking for each week. That was probably the thing I looked for the most. So, and the best way I could describe this too, for anyone here that might be considering taking online classes in the future, for a whole lot of people, what happened right now was all the reason in the world to never take an online class, because it was so chaotic. For a couple people, it might be the reason that they would want to take an online class because they saw, oh, this is how it works. My class, our class show, is pretty much right in the middle of how I would run an online class compared to how I would run a face-to-face class. So things that were chaotic at the start, if I was running this class as an online class the whole semester, probably wouldn't have been. So when I run a class online for the whole semester, I would give you the first 2 weeks of the class to really do a couple of things that all relate to just getting used to where everything is going to be. I wasn't able to do that in our class. Like the first week we had that quick discussion board assignment, that was kind of what I would do for that. But if we were an online class, you shouldn't get overwhelmed at the beginning, because all you would have to do the first 2 weeks would be to, in essence, do that quick discussion board assignment. The difference is I just do it as an icebreaker, so you're just saying hello, introducing yourself, kind of thing. And then to read chapter 1 and to look over the syllabus. So it starts a little slower, so you don't get overwhelmed really quick. So if anyone here did get overwhelmed right at the very beginning of this, hopefully that wouldn't happen if you took an online class from the beginning of the semester. I think I might be one of the few professors that do that over 2 weeks. However, almost every professor is going to give you a week really just to get used to the shell, the Canvas shell. So the one thing I would say, if you only don't like this going online because it was so hard to get started, I don't think you'd have that hurdle. Now, the other things that I did when it comes to an online class, the work that I would have you do would be just like what we did. We had something due every single week. That would be in an online class. Whereas in my face-to-face class, we have assignments due every few weeks, basically. It's not something every single week. So you could see that's definitely a difference between that. So our class and an online class both had something due every single week. But what I would have and do every week for an online class would have been a little bit more involved. We end up doing the same thing almost every single week. What you're doing is a little bit more involved on the discussion board post, but you get so used to how it works that by the end of the semester, they're very easy to do. I don't do these live streams with an online class only. I'm doing these live streams like this to try to mimic being in the classroom the very first few minutes in the classroom, where I'm just explaining an assignment, answering questions, and talking about what's to come that week. That's really what this is trying to do. But in an online class, I end up doing a lot of one-on-one video things. So sometimes I just do it over the phone, but one-on-one Zoom calls are a lot more common in an online class for me from the very beginning of the semester. And then, otherwise, it's pretty much just what we did. So it doesn't look exactly like this if you were to take a class the whole semester online with me, but this was kind of in between. So if you did like the online portions of this, you probably would like an online class. The only thing I can't stress enough, because as a professor thinking about what students went through with this, the thing that I keep coming back to is we basically threw you to the wolves in that everything went online. And a lot of you guys have strong Canvas experience, but not necessarily the level of Canvas experience that you're required as a prerequisite for an online class. And you had to learn that technology. Not only did you have to learn that technology, but you also had to do it incredibly fast. And you had to do it while you already had rules of how the class was going to work in person. And that switched online. So you have the same assignment for a lot of classes that are it's being done differently. End of the day, I think everyone in this world had to deal with some hard to deal with changes, obviously. So it's not that I think it was unfair. It was this whole virus has been unfair to everyone. But I do think that it was very easy to get overwhelmed at the beginning. So I'm very appreciative to everyone in my classes for getting past that first and foremost. Because while there are a few people that didn't do well once we switched over online, I'm sure that's true of every class in all of America doing this. The vast majority of you guys did find success, and I'm very appreciative of that. But if you only didn't like this modality because it was so overwhelming at the start, then don't be too scared off of the idea. in the future, because in the future, when you do an online class, it's not as crazy at the beginning as this class ended up. All right, let me get to some of the chat. Well, I don't like that you're telling me that you didn't buy the book. I mean, obviously, I would have preferred you having the book. But as long as you've been able to keep up with things. The good part about intro to psychology is there are even free textbooks that you can find. It's not the same examples as our book. It might not be organized the same way. It might not even be as good as our book, but it's still all the essential information that at least you can try to rely on that. If there's one thing, Michael, that separates someone who does well in an online class versus poor in an online class, it is very simply time management skills. In an online class, because you have things that are coming every single week, you have an assignment. If you fall behind, it becomes that much harder to catch back up. You fall behind in a face-to-face class, for a week, you can catch back up the following week because you probably have a week coming up very close where you don't have an assignment due. That doesn't work that way in an online class. And time management skills is the most important skill to doing well in the online classroom, I think. It's always possible. So right now I'm referring to Michael said we should live stream all the classes if we get back into a classroom. So it's always possible that we could do a semester if we needed to, where we basically met like this, where you had a actual class online. So I can share my screen, sharing a PowerPoint, and still be lecturing to you, kind of thing. And you could do it this way or through Zoom. The research behind online classrooms don't actually support that works the best, but that doesn't mean that it wouldn't work really well if we needed to mimic a face-to-face class. The research for if you're not familiar with anything with online classes, the research says that in an online classroom, you can learn more than in a face-to-face classroom. So an online class can be more effective. Now, that only is true if the class runs perfectly. Nothing in life is perfect. So in actual practice, face-to-face classrooms end up having higher successes than online classes. But in a perfect world, an online class works better. But the way that works is you can't in any way mimic a face-to-face class in an online class. It works. What worked well works well because it's not like that. So if you really wanted that type of classroom, you shouldn't probably do face-to-face lectures to the same degree that you do. You might get together for 15 minutes to talk about something live that you would post as a YouTube clip, like my 10-minute lectures or something. But that also doesn't mean that there's not a middle ground to that. If you are having students that are taking an online class that aren't prepared, they don't have the time management skills, they aren't tech savvy enough, then you're setting them up to do poorly. That's when I think that something like what you're describing actually could be very effective. So for whatever reason, this happens again in the fall, that we get this to come back. They've been talking about a second wind of the virus. That could be the direction that you see things go, because you can run the classroom like this and just try to treat it in between. You probably would go into it knowing it's not going to be as good as if you were face-to-face and not as good as if you were online. But depending on your student base, if you have students who aren't going to do well if it's online and you're not able to do it in person, well, that's when you have to really consider maybe that is the best option. And I think that's something that we will do. It might not be perfect, but you've even heard the president of Middlesex be saying that we're not striving for perfection right now. No industry, no one in this world right now is striving for perfection, other than the medical health professionals on the front lines trying to treat this. Maybe they're trying to, get to the point where they can really, really battle this virus. Everyone else, we are, because of an emergency, adapting. And we can't forget that all around. Everyone is adapting and doing the best that they can. All I can ask of people, all you can ask of people, all anyone should be asking is that we all are doing the best that we can. We're coming together, and we're not, using this as an excuse to, to not work as hard or to not take things as serious. And in a lot of ways, I'm sure we all do that. I mean, if I don't have a live stream for the day, I don't even really comb my hair. It's that kind of a thing. We should still be striving to do our best, I think. Ashita, I will explain the personality assignment once again in 1 second. Let me just get through the rest of the comments, and then we'll touch on that. Keith, so this week we have either the personality assignment or the movie research poster. The movie research poster is not the same as the step 4 poster. Next week we have the exam, and then you have to do both step 3 and step 4 are due on May 4th. Step 3 is the paper off of that we've been working towards. Step 4 is the poster that we've been working towards. The poster is based off of your paper. So I have them do the same day because you need to have the paper done, and then I'm just basically doing it. So you have the paper done, and then you're doing the poster while it's as fresh in your mind as you can. We will be better prepared for this in education as well as in everything. But we'll be better prepared for this in education if we do have to approach that in the fall. For the summer, all the classes are online, and I believe we're going to run them as more traditional online classes. In the fall, we may, you never know. I mean, it depends on what the school, and this is not in any way my decision, and I'm not even saying that this is what I would recommend. But you may see more online classes offered, and you might see a online section that basically has a set meeting time that we can have like the face-to-face mimic of a lecture. Like you would sign up for a class that meets on Tuesday and Thursday for an hour and 20 minutes, and we would meet doing this online. That could definitely be a possibility. Everything there we will see. We'll definitely be better prepared for the contingency plans that we need once we get to that point. Yes, Keith. Step 3 is the actual paper you're writing, and step 4 is the poster that you're working on. Those are both the common research assignment that we've been talking about all semester, the assignment that we met in the library for. And now let me jump back to Ishita. You wanted me to talk about the personality assignment a little bit more. So I'll go through the same short version that I did, and then if you have anything specific you want me to talk about more, I'll talk about that more as well. You just let me know what specifically you want me to go into more detail about. But I'm going to do the short version with the idea that you probably popped in after I did it at the beginning of the video today. Short version of what we're doing for the personality assignment. So, and I'm only talking about the personality assignment being the self versus self concept paper, not the movie research poster. If you have questions about the movie research poster, that only applies to the Tuesday and Thursday class. If you're here from the Monday class, that wasn't a possibility. We didn't have that assignment in place. Because that assignment for the Tuesday and Thursday class was going to be due the class that we got back from spring break when all this happened that we switched online. Some people had already almost finished it, so I wanted to have something in place that they didn't lose that assignment. But there was no way to do that assignment how it was intended to do it online. So that is a completely separate option. If you were working on the personality assignment being the self versus self-concept paper, what you needed to do is 3 parts. Part 1, I don't think many people have questions about. Part 1 is just writing a list of 20 or more items. You're answering the question, I am ... 20 or more items answering that question. Part 2 is then going one by one and evaluating them. So in part 1, when you're writing this list, I am ... do the best that you can to not stop and think about it, each item that you're writing down. If it pops into your head, no matter what it is, write it down. Even if it's something that just randomly popped into your head and you don't, when you evaluate it, it doesn't even make sense. Write it down on your list. You can always, when you evaluate it afterwards, cross it out if you needed to. Part 2 is evaluating things one by one. And what you're evaluating specifically for is you're evaluating each item. I am this, I am that, one by one, and saying, is that thing I wrote part of my real self or part of my self-concept? Now, if you're not familiar with what the real self is and self-concept is still, then I implore you to go back to the module. There's so much information that has been throughout about those. In my 10-minute video lecture, it talks about it. PowerPoint talks about it. You can use the textbook or internet research to look it up. Previous live streams have mentioned it, and you can get those off of my channel. I can give you the links to them. It's been mentioned in so many places. So unless you have specific questions about that, and then I'll go over it here too, I'm assuming that everyone knows now what the self and self-concept is. So you're deciding each thing is a part of my real self or part of my self-concept. And the only real issue that's going to come up there is if you see, like if you have a list of 20 things and everything's in your real self or everything's in your self-concept, that's a red flag. What that probably means is you either aren't self-evaluating very well, or you didn't come up with a very good and comprehensive list. You maybe need to go back and think of some more things on the list. But beyond that, if you it doesn't have to be 10 and 10. It could be 15 in your real self, 5 in your self-concept. It could be 17 in your self-concept and 3 in your real self. It just shouldn't be 20 and 0, basically, or 19 and 1 or something like that. As long as you have, even 18 and 2, I think is totally reasonable to think. After you evaluate them all, you label real self and self-concept for each one of them. Then you write the paper. As far as the paper is concerned, I can't stress this one enough. I keep saying this and making a big point of this. The paper that you're writing is informal. It's a reflection. You can use the word I. For a lot of you, this will look more like a blog post or a journal or diary entry than a formal paper, and that's fine. So it is a reflection exercise. It is informal, treated as such. Your paper needs to be 2 to 3 pages. So I can't stress this part enough either. When I say 2 to 3 pages, I mean it should be 2 full pages, not a couple lines onto the second page. And especially for this assignment, if you're giving me a paper that's a page and a couple lines, you're just not putting in enough effort onto this. There's no reason to not be able to hit 2 pages, because every single item that you're evaluating, I am this, you're going to have a couple sentences about. This is part of my real, I am this, and it's part of my real self. And here's why it's part of my real self. That's a couple of lines on a paper. If you're doing that, and even if you don't mention all 20 things, which is fine, 2 pages. But here's what I'm looking for specifically, and this is the case in point of where your grade's coming from. As long as your paper is long enough and you did the list right and things like that. I need to see that you, A, understood the self and self-concept, and I'm really not worried about that. I think almost everyone will. And B, I need to see that you can apply the self and self-concept to your list, so that you are talking about an item from your list and you are saying, I am this, and here is why this is part of myself, or I'm part of my self-concept. If I see you applying that, you're going to get a perfect score on this paper. And that's the assignment. Now, the last thing I need to mention to it, if you have a couple things on your list that you don't want to write about, that is okay. I'm not going to be counting 20 things out when I read your paper and grade it. I think that's actually going to happen for most people. I think most people in their list of 20 things are going to have something there that they probably would not like to talk about, because the truth is, we all have both, hopefully, a lot of great qualities that we think of, but we're all going to think of something that we can improve on. We all have traits and qualities within ourselves that are things that aren't a good quality. It's not something I brag about. And it might even be something I don't want other people to know about within me. If I do this list myself, I have no doubt that it's not going to be one thing. It's going to be 3 or 4 things of my 20 that will be things that, these are the things that, yeah, they're part of who I am, but these are the things I know I'm working on within myself. I don't want other people knowing about those things. I'm just working on those for me. And to that, if you end up on your list with something that's on there that you're working on for you, you don't need to talk about that with me. The fact that you can recognize this is something I want to work on for me is all the self-help you would need from my end for something like that. But you'll have plenty of things on your list to talk about in the paper. As long as you can reach those 2 pages, that's totally fine. Don't feel pressured to talk about every item on there. And I think most people will have at least 1 or 2 things that they want to keep off of that because they want to keep it to themselves. And if you're doing this list and really not evaluating things until afterwards, that'll probably happen to you. Now, if you're evaluating it while you write your list, that's when you might not write those things down. That's why I don't want you to evaluate it while you're writing the list. So do your best that you can with that, but don't feel pressured to talk about everything on your list. And you don't have to include your list line by line in the paper. I just need to see that you're talking about some of the items as it relates to the self and self-concept. No, Michael. So different assignments. For the personality assignment, you're correct, other than there's no poster. But when we step 3, so part 1, part 2, part 3 for the personality assignment, it's not the same thing as when I was saying step 3 and step 4 before. Step 3 is of your common research assignments. Remember, way back at the beginning of the semester, step 1 of that assignment was the day that we met in the library. Step 2 of that assignment was the research worksheet you already submitted to me. Step 3 of that assignment is the paper that's due on May 4th. Step 4 of that assignment is the poster that's due on May 4th. Now, for the personality assignment, that is the part 1 I am, part 2 evaluate it 1 by 1, part 3 write the informal paper up, and that's due tomorrow, Friday, by end of day. But 2 different assignments. And absolutely, you could be brutally honest in the assignment. This is not a formal paper. It is informal. This is something that's a very common exercise that someone might do with a therapist or with a school counselor or something like that. It's something that's meant for self-help. Be honest. The more honest that you are, if you can identify areas that you need to improve on, if you can identify areas that, well, they're part of things that you're good at, but not really part of the things that you really care that you're good at. So not part of the things in your real self in that example. That's only going to help you. I tell you, that's not actually just in our being brainwashed, or that's actually designed in our psyche. Part of who we are in our psyche is designed so that there are parts of who I am that are not operating in my conscious mind, in my conscious awareness. And that's in the PowerPoint as well, even though I'm not talking about that in a lot of detail in the live streams and the lectures. It is an important part to understand, is that there is a conscious mind, a subconscious, preconscious mind, and an unconscious mind. There are elements of who we really are that do not operate in our conscious minds. Because very simply, if every part of who I am operates in my conscious mind, then that then means that the bad qualities of who I am, because we all have good and bad qualities, that those bad qualities are all in my conscious mind. Well, if I'm consciously aware of all of those bad qualities, then I set myself up for disappointment. I set myself up to be weaker. And the way our psyche is actually designed is so that we are improving every day. Every day we're getting a little bit better. And the only way that can work that way is if there's elements of who I am that I'm not aware of. So that's what self-actualization is really all about. Well, yeah, everything that's happening in our life is part of who we are. It's just a matter of if it's part of the conscious perception I have of who I am, or if it's part of my subconscious or unconscious perceptions of who I am. That's what this assignment's the beginning of what you're talking about right now. the aftermath, if you were to do this with a counselor, and all I'm having you do is the exercise of it, when you would meet with the counselor to talk about the exercise, that's exactly what we would be talking about, is how to bring what's called congruence. And if you're looking at those sides, congruence is mentioned. It's where those bubbles overlap. So you have the real self here, you have the self-concept here. Well, they overlap like a Venn diagram. The overlapping part is the congruence. Where they don't overlap is incongruence. So what ends up happening is if we end up with too much incongruence, so we aren't consciously aware of enough of who we are. Well, the whole point of self-actualization is reaching our potential. So every day we're supposed to be improving. Every day we're working on ourselves. But if I'm working on myself today, I can only work on my conscious perception of myself. So that's great as long as my conscious perception of myself overlaps with my real perception, my unconscious perception of myself. But if I have too much incongruence, well, now today I'm working on improving myself, but what I actually am doing is I'm not at all working on who I really am. I'm only working then on who I think I am, because our self-concept, who I think I am, is entirely in our conscious mind. If those two things don't overlap at all, well, now I'm still working on improving today, but I'm actually not helping myself at all because I'm not working on anything that I actually care about deep down in my unconscious mind. So the end result of that, if you've ever gotten to the point in your life that you would describe it as when it rains, it pours, where it seems like everything that can go wrong is going wrong, most likely that's why this is happening. It's not that more is necessarily going wrong today than other days. Other days, a lot of things go wrong. It's just that on those other days, we sweep them under the rug before we give them a second's thought. When I drive home and I get cut off, it might piss me off for a few seconds, and if I'm being honest, a few minutes. But then eventually I forget about it. But when we get to the point where we have too much incongruence, we can't forget about those things. Now what ends up happening, the way that our psyche would try to resolve this on its own, and this is why when you get to the point of when it rains, it pours, you should always talk to someone, because that's what a professional does. And that's actually one of my big takeaways that I'm going to have for the class is based off of that. And I'll mention that actually in a couple minutes, but let me finish the point before I get to that. We need to talk to someone because that person can help that congruence back so we're in good shape. But the natural way that we would progress through working on this to try to resolve this is now we cannot sweep anything under the rug that should be. There are things in our life that are designed to be in our unconscious mind and not our conscious mind. That's why defense mechanisms exist. Defense mechanisms exist to protect our conscious mind from our unconscious mind, because there are parts of who we are, of our memories, of our life experiences, that all it's going to do is cause anxiety for no benefit. So we actually become protective against those things. But the way that the psyche will respond in that time of desperation is we can't sweep those things under the rug. So now we're thinking about them constantly. It's the only way that we have naturally to get back to who we really are. But what in essence happens is to get back to who we really are, it means we have to go into a dark place to get out of that. Well, that's why talking to a professional when you're in that time of need, when you get to the point of when it rains, it pours, talking to someone is so important because it can get us out of that faster. Yeah. And we can all do this on our own, but it can take, it can take 18 months. It can even take 36 months if you get into like a major depression through this, to work this through on our own. But the point that I wanted to make about that is we don't technically need. There are states of repression that are questioned. There are elements of repression that we can see do happen within our unconscious mind, but there are things of repression that we need a lot more investigation for, Keith. There's a whole lot towards how repression works and how our mind actually would process it. So for example, to that, if someone blocks out a traumatic event, well, someone who witnessed a a murder or a rape or something like that, they can repress that. Someone who was in combat, a veteran that comes back, can have some elements of repression. That every one of those could be different. Someone who is a victim of abuse will actually have repression operate differently, usually, than someone who just witnessed a traumatic event. And going one step further to that, usually we can get underneath the defense mechanism of repression, but with children, we sometimes find that it's impossible to. So there's a lot of repression that needs to be understood better, or maybe defined differently. So there's definitely some elements that are questions with repression, but there's also a good amount of support for it as well. So I can't. It's like so many things in psychology where we can't say conclusively true. Almost everything does need a little bit extra study to it. But let me finish up with the point that I was making. We can get that help that we need from each other. We don't have to do it through talking to a therapist, talking to a professional. Now, I'll always recommend to talk to a professional because, well, a professional is trained to do it, so they're going to do it better. It's going to be faster and stronger. But we don't necessarily need to talk to someone. Now, I will recommend to anyone, I should say, to talk to a professional because it can only help. Our psyche isn't designed to have complete congruence. It actually would be unhealthy if we did. So because we all have some incongruence, we all can benefit from talking to a counselor, because all that therapist does is they bring the real self and self-concept closer together. But now, if you were looking at the very last slide on that PowerPoint, there's a term called unconditional positive regard, and that's something that we get from a therapist, and it's very important. In every relationship in our life, we get positive regard from other people by meeting their conditions, even from our parents. When we were young, our parents might have given us positive regard unconditionally, but as you start to age, your parents, you have to meet their conditions too. You don't get positive regard just for trying really hard as we age often from our parents. The only relationship that we get it unconditionally is from a therapist. With a big exception, though, this is a very important asterisk. We get this unconditionally from other people, from our friends, our family, the people that are close to us, not just anyone, but the people that are important to us, that we value those relationships. We can get unconditional positive regard from them in desperate times, in times of need. Not in the normal time. You're just talking to someone, something happens and your parents might not give you that positive regard unconditionally. But if you were desperate for it, they probably would. So think about this. You might be able to remember, I think an example that some people might be able to picture pretty well is you have a friend that comes to you and they're inconsolable. They're in tears. They're crying. They're in tears. They're so worked up. Or just in a really bad state because they just got dumped. Think about what you might say to your friend in that circumstance. It's their loss. It's not yours. You're going to find somebody better in no time. You're going to be okay. That might not be what you were thinking. So what you probably did, you also would have matched your emotions to there. So we usually get a little soft-spoken, a little somber as we're replying to that, as we're talking to them. But we're giving them unconditional positive regard. We're saying that guy was an ass. We're saying that it's their loss, not yours, so on and so forth. We're giving them unconditional positive regard, but that might not be what we were actually thinking. Because there could be the example where that happened where we're thinking, well, I'm not surprised. So it could be an example where my friend is coming to me and I just got dumped. I'm never going to find someone. All the things that they're saying, I can't believe that this happened to me, et cetera, et cetera. We're saying, oh, it's their loss, not yours. You're going to find somebody better in no time. Don't worry about it. You're better off without them. But I might be thinking, of course they dumped you. You cheated on me, you dumb, insert explicitive. You see, I might be thinking, well, yeah, it was your fault because it might have actually in my mind been their fault. But that wouldn't be what I would say to them. What I would say to them is, it's their loss, not yours. You're going to find someone, because they're my friends and I can see that they need it. But this is so important. We only do that when someone needs it. Otherwise, we don't. If that person wasn't a wreck at that point in time, if that person wasn't evidently hurt, I wouldn't have given them that positive regard unconditionally. I would have made them reach my conditions of worth, that's called. Here's the thing. Here's one of the big takeaways that I have for the class, is we can all be each other's therapists. We can all give each other the help that we really need that would actually help our psyche. But there's a big extra asterisk here, and it's an asterisk that I know from experience people don't believe me when I first say it, so I can only say it for what it's worth. You can be each other's help. We can be each other's therapists and help get that congruence in our psyche. But it will only work if we schedule the time to talk about those things. If you just say, hey, I'm always here if you need to talk. Yeah, that's nice to hear, but we don't trust that that's true. If someone says to me, hey, just, I'm always here for you. It's nice. That makes me think that they're thinking about me. But that doesn't make me open up and think, oh, I can actually talk to them. Because I still am wondering if they have ulterior motives, if that's true or not. But if we schedule a time to actually talk about those things, if we say, and whatever your schedule would work for this, if we say, hey, every Wednesday night, let's have dinner and let's talk about the things that are really bothering us. And we schedule that. And then you just stick to that. Then we can do this. We can give each other unconditional positive regard and help one another out. But if you rely on just saying, I'm always here for you, it won't work. It might work once, but it probably won't even work once. You need to schedule it for it to work. That's one of the big things I would leave to every student in my classes. One of the big things that I've learned in life, and I'll talk about the other one next week, because I do have two big takeaways from all of my learning and experience in psychology. But one of the big ones for me is that when you want to talk to someone, you schedule it, and then you can talk to them, and you can actually really, really help one another. We all can use unconditional positive regard. All it does is bring congruence in our psyche. But if you don't schedule it, it just doesn't happen. Well, yeah, absolutely. That goes into Jung a little bit. Jungian development is very big on our real self and our persona. Who you show the rest of the world that you are is not who you really are. There are parts of who you really are that you keep hidden. And that's why our persona, our public persona, is always a little different than who we really are. Now, some of that goes into, maybe the norms of a job that we have. A police officer has to be authoritative when they're dealing with, someone who might be committing a crime or something like that. They might not be as authoritative in real life or something like that. But it also is just true in our personality. We match our persona to the needs of the group that we're in. When you're in high school and you're thinking of all of your friends in high school, well, you're probably pretending to be more interested than you really were in some of the other interests within that group. And FOMO now. We even went further with that term. Yes, that is absolutely true. It's an irrational fear. If you actually stop and think about the idea of, well, if I don't agree with you, the group will outcast me. The group will not welcome me. They'll kick me out. People realize that that's irrational. But in the moment, in practice, people think that the people feel a pressure to conform. So this is actually, that gets into social psychology, which we talked about. And this goes into, this is really, really strong with how peer pressure can work and how pressure within workplaces work. People will conform to the group because they have an irrational fear that if they disagree, if they create conflict within the group, that group will no longer welcome them as part of that group. It's irrational. What I mean by that is, after that happens, we can interview that person and say, so stop and think about it. Do you really think that if you disagreed with that decision, do you really think they wouldn't have welcomed you to come to happy hour afterwards with them? And people would realize that, no, that's probably not true. But in the moment, we don't act that way. One of the things that when I teach the classes within IO psychology, one of the big things that I focus on with my classes there when we focus on conflict is there is such a big difference when it comes to conflict between you have the impulse to disagree. So you have the initiation of the conflict potential. And you now have disagreement, you just don't know if you want to say anything. There is I can't change that initial reaction because that's a reflex. That's instinctual. But there's such a difference between that reaction happening and you not realizing it for a few minutes that you could have disagreed until after the fact when you realize, okay, that was irrational, versus it just taking a few seconds. Because there is a such thing as you want to disagree, it takes a few seconds, and then you say, okay, I can still say this, and you speak up. If that takes a few minutes, the moment's gone. The moment's passed. You're not going to backtrack minutes or hours to bring that conflict back up. It's just pouring salt on old wounds at that point in time. So it's actually a really, really important thing is trying to consciously recognize that fear can be irrational, but it's 100% what it is. We have a fear, not just that fear of missing out, we have a fear of not being accepted as part of the group, and we define ourselves by other people. Being part of a group is not a want, it's a need. And there is so much in social psychology that supports that. Well, this was actually a really fun discussion too. I'm really excited that we ended up talking about some of the things that we went into today. Anybody have any other questions for an hour or so? Unless you have questions, and there's nothing else that I'm going to bring back for like new assignments or anything. Yep. We become ticking time bombs. That's a metaphor I think many of us have probably heard for very, very, very long times. When you hold things in like that, you just basically are a ticking time bomb. Eventually, it's just going to come out. Sounds good. Sounds good, Michael. As long as it's on to the third page, I'm a happy camper. And it could be tomorrow too, but if you get it in tonight, even better. Have a great day too. So I'm not familiar enough with therapy on children. So I don't want to really answer that in terms of school counseling and school age therapy, because it's probably very different. The idea of reward and punishment for a child, because of how parenting works, is certainly an important one. So Keith, I don't think I'm the right person to answer that. I don't see any reason to think that it couldn't break someone if it was not done effectively as an adult, but the way that therapy can end up being viewed as a punishment with a child could be very different than how that would work when I study it with adults. My clinical psychology class, it didn't go into childhood therapy. So I don't feel comfortable answering that. I don't want to answer it and be completely wrong. The only thing I can say is that is why it is very important, if you are a therapist, you have such an impact on someone's life that you have to make sure you follow what research says with that. Because it's certainly, if you didn't do things effectively, I mean, you can definitely get to that point. And there's examples of people committing suicide because their therapist basically told them the wrong thing. But when it comes to childhood, that would be outside of my expertise. So sorry, I can't answer a little bit more there, Keith. And you're very welcome. And if anybody has any other questions, I'm not in a rush to hop out of here, but if you don't have any other questions, this was a really cool live stream. I'm really happy that we chatted, as much as we did. And we'll be back again on Monday. And if you have any questions about the personality assignment, just shoot me an email. Otherwise, I'm going to keep the window open just in case anybody has anything to add to chat. But I'm going to check my phone for a few minutes, and I'll probably close the live stream in a minute if nobody has any questions. Have a great weekend, Keith. Stay safe. All right. I think at this point I'm going to close the live stream. Email me if you have any questions. I'll see you next week.